You filled the feeder this morning, grabbed your coffee, and didn't think about it again. Simple act. 30 seconds of your day. But while you were standing at that feeder, something happened inside the brain of a small bird watching you from a branch nearby. And scientists still can't fully explain what that something is. It didn't just see food, it saw you. It recorded your silhouette, your movement, the way you held the scoop, the specific rhythm of your footsteps walking back to the door. And that information is now stored in its neural architecture as reliably as a contact saved in your phone. You're watching Milo Know, a place where ordinary things suddenly become unbelievable. Subscribe if you love discovering what most people walk past without ever thinking twice. Let's begin. Most people think a bird feeder is just a nice thing to have in the yard, a small kindness. Bird comes, eats leaves, done. But ornithologists who have spent decades studying this exact interaction will tell you something completely different. What happens between a human and a bird at a simple wooden feeder is one of the most sophisticated mutual learning processes ever documented in urban wildlife. Not instinct, not coincidence, learning. And it runs in both directions. You think you are feeding the birds, but there is serious scientific evidence that the birds have been studying you back, cataloging who you are, how you behave, whether you can be trusted, and whether you are a threat. Researchers at the University of Washington proved that birds not only recognize individual human faces, but actively share that information with other members of their group. Right now, while you are watching this video, there is a bird somewhere near your home that has formed an opinion about you. And in the next 12 minutes, we are going to break down exactly how that opinion was built, why it matters more than you think, and how, without knowing it, you have already begun to change the evolution of an entire species. Here is the story you tell yourself every time a bird lands on your feeder. It was hungry. It found food. It will come back because the food is here. That explanation feels complete, it feels logical, and it is almost entirely wrong. Hunger is just the trigger. What happens after that first visit is something far more complicated and far more interesting than a simple transaction between an animal and a calorie source. Scientists call it associative learning, and in birds, it operates at a speed and depth that should genuinely make you uncomfortable about how casually we have dismissed these animals for centuries. A bird that visits your feeder is not returning because it remembers where the food is. It is returning because it has built a detailed behavioral model of you, your schedule, your reliability, your threat level, your patterns. In a 2019 study at the University of Wisconsin, researchers tracked individual great tits visiting residential feeders and found that birds exposed to consistent human presence developed measurably higher neural activity in the decision-making regions of their brain compared to wild individuals from the same population. 34% higher. That is not a rounding error. That is the difference between a brain that reacts and a brain that plans. And here is the part that destroys the myth completely. The feeder is not the point. You are the point. Researchers removed feeders from yards after months of consistent use and observed the birds. They didn't scatter. They waited. They returned to the same spot at the same time and watched the door of the house. They weren't looking for seeds. They were looking for the person who brought the seeds. The food was just the introduction. You became the variable they were tracking. What you built without knowing it wasn't a feeding station, it was a classroom. And you have been the subject of study since the very first morning you walked outside with that scoop. Let me introduce you to a bird. She weighs less than 2 teaspoons of sugar. Her heart beats 600 times per minute. It is minus 11 degrees outside and she has been awake for 4 hours already, working a territory of roughly 3 city blocks with the focused intensity of someone running a small and extremely stressful business. She is a black-capped chickadee and she has a problem. There are 7 other chickadees competing for the same resources in the same radius, and 3 of them are bigger than her. She cannot win a direct confrontation, so she doesn't try. Instead, she does something that took researchers years to fully appreciate. She watches people. Not randomly, specifically. She has identified 4 houses on her route and ranked them by reliability. 1 yard gets skipped entirely because the person there moves unpredictably and once came outside too fast. 2 yards are medium value. And then there is yours. You come out at roughly the same time each morning. You move slowly. You don't look directly at the feeder while filling it. You go back inside within 40 seconds. She has clocked this. She knows your schedule better than most of your neighbors do. But here is where it gets genuinely extraordinary. She doesn't just remember where the food is. She remembers which of her competitors knows where your feeder is. And she has begun timing her visits to slots when those specific competitors are occupied elsewhere. She is not reacting to her environment, she is modeling it, tracking multiple individuals simultaneously and making calculated decisions based on predicted behavior. This is called cache protection strategy, and it requires what scientists formally classify as a theory of mind, the ability to simulate what another creature is thinking. For decades, we believed that was uniquely human. Your chickadee figured it out because she needed to survive your neighborhood. In 2006, a neurobiologist named John Marsluff put on a caveman mask, walked onto the campus of the University of Washington, and trapped 7 crows. Perfectly harmless procedure, standard field research. But what happened over the next 15 years turned into one of the most unsettling demonstrations of animal cognition ever recorded. Those 7 crows remembered his face. Not just the individual birds he trapped. Their offspring remembered it. Birds that were never trapped, never present during the original experiment, would dive-bomb anyone wearing that specific mask years later, on a campus with thousands of people moving through it daily. The information about one dangerous human face had been culturally transmitted across generations. Not through DNA, through teaching. Now bring that back to your yard. Every interaction you have ever had near that feeder has been logged, assessed, and in some cases, shared. The University of Cambridge confirmed that great tits don't just recognize individual humans. They maintain what researchers describe as a social reputation network, passing behavioral information about specific people between flock members. You have a reputation among your local birds, and you had no vote in how it was formed. But the deeper shock is what your presence has done to their biology. Studies comparing urban birds with consistent human contact against rural populations of the same species show structural differences in the brain itself. The hippocampus, the region responsible for memory, spatial navigation and learning, is measurably larger in birds that grew up around active feeders and regular human contact. Your 30-second morning routine has been applying neurological pressure to a wild animal, reshaping it at the cellular level. And this is not happening over thousands of years the way we normally think about evolutionary change. Researchers are documenting these structural differences across a span of decades. You are not observing nature from a distance through your kitchen window. You are inside the experiment. You have always been inside the experiment. Right now, while you are watching this video, a bird near your home is making a decision based on you. Not based on weather, not based on instinct, not based on some ancient genetic program running on autopilot. Based on you specifically. Your schedule, your consistency, your behavior over the last weeks and months has become a variable in a calculation happening inside a brain the size of a walnut. And that calculation is surprisingly sophisticated. Researchers studying urban bird populations across North America and Europe have documented something they are calling behavioral synchronization. Birds that live near active feeders with consistent human routines begin shifting their own daily activity patterns to align with the schedule of the person who feeds them. If you go outside at 8 in the morning, the peak activity window of your local birds quietly migrates toward 8 in the morning. Your rhythm becomes their rhythm. Your life bleeds into theirs in ways that are measurable on a graph. But it goes further than scheduling. When researchers tracked cortisol levels in birds whose regular feeders suddenly disappeared for a week due to travel or illness, they found elevated stress markers that mirrored what you would expect from a genuine loss of a reliable resource. Not mild inconvenience. Documented physiological stress. These birds had built you into their survival model so completely that your absence registered as a threat. Think about every person on your street with a feeder. Every apartment balcony with a small dish of seeds. Every office courtyard where someone leaves out scraps at lunch. Multiply that across every city on the planet, and you begin to see what is actually happening. Hundreds of millions of people have quietly and accidentally inserted themselves into the nervous systems of wild animals. We have created an invisible web of dependency and cognition stretching across every urban landscape on Earth, and almost none of us knew we were building it. So here is where we have to get honest about something. Everything we just covered sounds wonderful. Smarter birds, deeper connection, an invisible web of mutual recognition stretching across your neighborhood. And most of it is wonderful. But science doesn't let you keep only the comfortable parts. Ornithologists have a name for what happens when consistent feeding stops abruptly. They call it feeder dependency, and the data behind it is genuinely difficult to sit with. Populations of urban birds in cities where widespread feeding was suddenly discontinued showed significantly higher winter mortality rates than populations in cities where feeders never existed at all. Not the same mortality rate, higher. Because a bird that has spent 2 years optimizing its behavior around a reliable human food source has quietly deprioritized the skills it would need to survive without one. It didn't forget how to forage, it just got out of practice. You gave it something better, and its brain rationally adapted to that reality. Which means the kindness was real, the connection was real, but the responsibility that comes with it is also real. You are not a passive observer tossing seeds into a void. You are an active participant in the cognitive and behavioral development of wild animals that have built their survival strategy around your consistency. That is not a reason to stop. It is a reason to understand what you are actually doing when you walk outside each morning with that scoop. You stepped into a relationship, a strange, quiet, ongoing relationship with creatures that watch you, remember you, and in their own measurable way, depend on you. And the most remarkable thing about all of it is that it started with 30 seconds and a bag of sunflower seeds. Have you ever noticed a specific bird that seems to recognize you personally? One that behaves differently around you than around anyone else in your household? Write it in the comments below, because I read every single one, and your story might become our next video.